Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. This is a very, very special Leaf and Bean. We've been off for several months.
Yes, the
But
midterms in America.
yeah, midterms in America. But we are back for a very, very special UK general election chat. The UK general election, many wouldn't have thought it would be so, but it's shaping up to be one of the more exciting ones, uh, at least in recent memory. A lot of big news has been happening over the past few months. The surge in the SNP in Scotland, in particular, driving a lot of um, concern, excitement, and uncertainty. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what potential partnerships could emerge afterwards, but we will start with just the outlook as it stands presently.
In 2010, the British public were pretty undecided about who they wanted to be their prime minister, and so for the first time in several decades, no party emerged with an overall majority. And really, over the last 5 years, Britain's indecision has only grown, and you've seen the Conservatives not being able to come anywhere close to an overall majority, Labour not able to do that. The Liberals, though, cratering, and the SNP on the ascendancy. So at the moment, the projections look like the Conservatives will have a few more MPs than Labour, but certainly neither of them anywhere close to an overall majority. So, as you hinted at, although there's still all to campaign for, there'll certainly be deal-making behind the scenes after the election that is going to really determine who becomes Prime Minister.
So, can you just, right now we are in coalition, and I think especially folks in the States might not understand precisely what that means, and especially why a coalition is made up of the Conservative Party and the Liberal Democrats, which are traditionally quite a liberal party. How does that actually work, and and how has it been perceived over the past 5 years?
Uh, well, so uh, how much of an historical answer should I give you? I guess you're right. The Liberal Party was kind of conceived as the kind of left-wing party up until the 1920s, when they were a party of government. But then with the emergence of the Labour Party and the Labour movement, the Liberals have kind of moved around trying to find different places. In the mid 90s, they were really a centrist party between Conservatives on the right and Labour on the left. And then over the time when Labour moved to the centre ground, they moved kind of to the left to try and take some of that space. But they've, for the most of the last 80 years or so, they've been the third party in British politics. Um, uh, and so that meant that when no party had really overall control after the 2010 election, the Liberals were in the curious position of being a kind of kingmaker. Their MPs, their 59 MPs, were able to either vote with Conservatives or Labour, and put that party into government. And following 13 years of Labour rule, they decided to team up with the Conservatives, who were also the largest party at that time.
Now, interestingly, the Lib Dems, the story of the Lib Dems right before the general election probably couldn't be more starkly different in 2010 than it is today. Uh,
Yes.
the eve of the 2010 general election, you had a very passionate Nick Clegg, this fresh-faced person performing extremely well in the leader debates at the time, which only had three people standing. Um, there was an excitement about the Liberal Democrats, an excitement that they could actually make a difference. You had also the natural constituencies of the Liberal Democrats, including a very significant portion of the student vote as well. And then 5 years since, quite a different story. And the coalition, having not really had much of a benefit for the target constituencies of the Liberal Democrats, or at least one major constituency being the students.
Yeah. So you're right. Before the 2010 debates, I think pretty much the vast majority of the British electorate really hadn't heard of Nick Clegg. It was like, who is Nick Clegg? And then he did so well in the debates. Everybody was suddenly saying, I agree with Nick. And in fact, he did so well in the debates that the main liberal newspaper in the UK, The Guardian, considered endorsing the Liberal Democrats, breaking decades of tradition endorsing Labour. But then you're right. Then they entered into government and they broke what was really their signature pledge on no tuition fees, and really just have taken a lot of the brunt of criticism from the government. They have got more of that criticism than the Conservative Party have, and so they're really at the moment looking to be decimated. In fact, even worse than that, they're going to lose around 30 seats in their most recent projections, which is really an astonishing fall from 56. But interestingly, that could still make them the kingmaker in a future in it, after the election.
So, what is the Liberal Democrat? Just I find the Liberal Democrat situation before we go over to the Conservatives how they're doing and Labour how they're doing. The Liberal Democrats I just find incredibly interesting because they're they are hemorrhaging seats, or they seem to be hemorrhaging seats.
Yeah.
Although a lot of people are quick to say that in the polls in which they hemorrhage the most amount of seats, it's usually a party poll rather than an individual poll, like the
Yes.
Lord Ashcroft poll. So they might actually perform better than person to person than nationally. So there is that. But because they're hemorrhaging so many seats, it's tough to see how the Lib Dems can argue their way, back into the good graces of certain types of constituencies, unless you're talking about areas that, the Conservatives are never going to win. So the few Conservatives that are in the district might throw their weight behind the Lib Dems in the hope that they would, continue going into a coalition. But Nick Clegg has also gone on record saying that that they would consider going back into coalition with the Conservatives before adapting that to say that the party with the most amount of votes has the first right to try and form the government.
Of course.
But how do the Lib Dems try and argue? What are they arguing for why people should vote for them, especially the liberal side of their constituency, the students and et cetera? What are their main arguments?
Well, their main argument has been that they have tempered the kind of right wing or conservative machinations of the Conservative Party, and have brought them into the center. They've pushed for tax cuts for low income earners, particularly people who are on the minimum wage. And so that's their argument. Their argument is, here's what we brought to the table. We were a small minority party in the government, but this is what we achieved. And regardless of which party wins the next election, we're probably going to be in coalition with them. And then here are what our demands are going to be. We're going to demand a raise for public sector workers and various other red lines to do with education funding. So that's really their pitch. In a sense, actually, out of the main party leaders at Westminster, he's perhaps been the most honest in that he is the one saying we're definitely going to be in a coalition, or here would what our negotiating positions be ahead of setting up a coalition. Whereas you saw in the Newsnight debate, not the Newsnight debate, the Question Time debate a few nights ago, the other two leaders, Miliband and Cameron, were a bit more evasive about what they were hoping to gain in negotiations from a coalition. Both of them were saying, well, we hope to gain an overall majority, which didn't really wash with the audience that knows that there's basically no chance of that happening for either of them.
Okay, so I think we know basically what the Lib Dem situation is. A lot of polls are seeing them hemorrhaging seats. For interest, where they're projected to be hemorrhaging. The Conservatives seem to be taking a few. However, almost all, at least at the moment, all of their seats in Scotland seem to be at play. You know,
Yes, I think they're projected to probably win Orkney and Shetland, but everything else I think is very close to being lost, if not actually well below.
yeah. So they're losing, they're hemorrhaging to the SNP, to the Conservatives, and to Labour. I guess the majority of them, they seem to be hemorrhaging, or the majority of them, sorry, not the majority, the largest amount of those at the moment, it seems to be going to the Conservatives, just because I think more seats in England. Um, so we know their situation. We also know what they're arguing. They're arguing that, look, if we weren't there, the Conservatives would have been way worse, and it would have been a far more right-wing government that we've tempered. We're going to cut not as much as the Conservatives. We're going to spend not as much as Labour. So we're about tempering government. So
Yeah,
that seems to be their main crux. Would that be fair?
that would be fair to say, but it would also be fair to say that it hasn't really resonated with a
Yeah.
country that is not yet to forgive them for
Yeah.
breaking promises on tuition fees and being otherwise seen to get into bed with the Conservatives and own a lot of their unpopular policies.
Yep. Okay, so now let's switch. How about the Conservatives? So the Conservatives right now are sitting on 305, and the latest projections that I'm seeing, again, this is a poll of polls, but they could be get down to around 275. So that's quite a significant loss. So why aren't the Conservatives running away with this? If the economy is doing really well, we have, apparently, we've made more jobs in the UK than anywhere else in Europe combined. So why is it that David Cameron isn't honestly expecting to have an overwhelming majority?
Well, I mean, I guess you just said the economy is doing very well, and maybe compared to an OECD average, that's true. But I don't think anybody really feels that the economy is booming and we're back to the good times, and people who are finishing college will get 5 or 6 job offers, and everybody's getting pay raises and so forth. Nobody really feels that. So to say that the economy is doing well, he's definitely made that the central plank of his argument, and that you should keep going with his party to maintain that recovery. But nobody really feels that, and so the kind of tepid support that they had received in 2010 has really, in no sense, warmed over the last 5 years. And that being said, they're also being squeezed by UKIP on the right, so they've had to try and, although it now looks like UKIP won't win that many seats, that's meant in the last couple of years or so, they've had to be slightly to the right of where I think they would like to be, or at least where David Cameron would like to be. When he became leader, he changed the logo from a fist holding a torch. He changed that into a nice hand-drawn picture of a tree. He made a climate change a central part of his campaign, really trying to kind of detoxify the Conservative Party and appeal to the middle ground in British politics. And UKIP really prevented them from doing that. And while they've seen off, largely anyway, the challenge from UKIP, according to current polling, I think that's come at a cost, and the cost has been continuing to aggressively go for the center of British politics. So they really haven't benefited much from the economy improving, in part because people don't believe the economy has improved all that much. And they face this other problem with UKIP and trying to position themselves on the right or the center of issues.
I think also might be important to note that in 2010 they were coming off of a majority Labour government, and so they had to win in a lot of like English marginal seats. So in the States, it's like you had a lot of swing districts go to the Conservatives, whereas it seems as though right now the main Labour pickups or projected pickups from the Conservatives seem to be going from those same or similar English marginal seats.
I think that's an excellent point. You're right. Labour was fantastically unpopular in 2010. They presided over the economic crash, and there was infighting at the top. People kept on challenging Gordon Brown to leadership. He didn't look like the kind of strong, competent leader that had the support of his party, and so the Conservatives gained quite a lot from that in parts of England. And you're right. There's an extent to which they're losing that now. They don't
Yeah.
have that edge as a result.
So it seems like the current the current gains and losses for the Conservatives are estimated to be that the biggest thing to me is that 40, apparently or at least as opposed to current polling, they're in danger of losing up to 40 seats just to Labor. That's quite a bit. I mean, they're looking to pick up about 12 from the Liberal Democrats. They might be losing 2 to UKIP but gaining 1 from UKIP, and they might be they're only 1 in Scotland, might go to the SNP if the SNP enjoys a wave. But the big kind of movement, the shift for the Conservatives has been a real big, or might be a real big chunk to Labour, and it seems as though those are mostly in those English marginal seats.
Yes, that's true, and I think that's very interesting. Although it's also important to point out that there's an extent to which that UKIP votes are kind of acting as a spoiler to that, and that's helping Labour push ahead of the Conservatives.
Right. True.
And
Okay. That's legitimate. Okay. So now Labor. Right now Labor's sitting on 258 seats. They could be projected to gain as much as 269, 270, even maybe a couple more. So quite a big increase, right? But at the same time, they're losing, or it seems as though they are hemorrhaging their seats in Scotland, and they might be, they could be in some projections wiped out of Scotland. I mean, what's the deal with Labour, and why is this a mixed bag for them right now?
well, so it's definitely a mixed bag. They've actually had a good few weeks. I feel that over the last few years, the press and the public have really ignored Ed Miliband as the guy
Yeah.
who can't even eat a sandwich properly. And then he went on the debates, and it turned out actually he could keep talking complete sentences. He said mangling his own sentence. He could talk in complete sentences, and actually what he said, was persuasive to some people. So the fact that he wasn't actually a completely weird alien lunatic has meant that he's actually seen a bit of a surge. I don't want to overemphasize how strong that's been, but there's been a bit of the tide has been going in his favor for the last few weeks or so. And so you're right, that's been a gain for him. But north of the border in Scotland, Labour is looking just to be absolutely annihilated. They currently have the vast majority of the Scotland's 59 seats. They have over 40,
They
and
have
yet
38, I think.
38, and yet the SNP are projected to win as many as 50 seats. In fact, I'm to think that 50 might even be a slightly soft number for the SNP. The SNP have really they may have lost the referendum, the Scottish independence referendum in 2014, but they've really won everything since then. They've just become tremendously popular, and that's entirely at the expense of Labour, which has really had a stronghold in Scotland for decades and decades.
I mean, in looking at the projected gains and losses for Labor, you see that they might be taking as many as 40 seats from the Conservatives, right? So that's
Yeah.
pretty impressive
Yep.
number. But they're at risk of losing 38 seats to the SNP. So it's
Yes.
almost a wash. I mean, their real gains, their real net gains are coming at the expense from the Liberal Democrats, where they're projected to pick up 9 seats.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, they're gaining 11, in these projections, and it makes you think, is this a missed out? Was the dealing of Scotland, or the interaction with Scotland by the Labour Party, is that going to come back to bite them? Right? A lot of people were saying that the interaction between Labour and Scottish Labour had been one of kind of distance, and what did they say? It was like
The
the
branch office.
yeah, the branch office. Is this kind of? I mean, we're going to get into the SNP, I think, in a second, but as a perception south of the border, it doesn't seem to have filtered through as much. But do you think that looking back on this election later on, if things pan out as they look like they're going to, um, uh, is that a valid criticism for how Labour is behaving? Like they've just dropped the ball on Scotland?
Well, I will give you the caveat to my answer before I give you my answer.
Okay.
And the caveat to my answer is that on current polling, Labour are expected to get 270 seats or so, with the SNP getting 50 or so. But even if all 50 of those seats went to Labour, giving them 321, they would still be 5 seats short of an overall majority. So even if the SNP weren't an issue north of the border, while Labour would be the largest party after the election on current projections, they would still be a minority party, and so we would still be having this conversation about why hasn't Labour been able to capitalise on perceived conservative liberal failings over the last 5 years or so? Why hasn't Ed Miliband been able to project himself as a strong leader? We would still be having that conversation. But we're having that conversation even more so because you're right, the SNP have just absolutely run away with the vote north of the border. The independence referendum, the yes vote got about 45% of the vote, which was not enough to win that vote. But when there's really only one major independence party, and you get 45% of the vote, where the other 55% is split between all the parties. With the first past the post system, that means that the SNP absolutely blow everyone out of the water. 45% is a landslide. So you're right. Labour really has dropped the ball over the last 20 years. They've really dropped the ball on Scottish politics. You saw that when the SNP won their minority government in the Scottish Parliament nearly 9 years ago now. And then you saw that again 4 years ago when they couldn't, when the SNP won an overall majority in the Scottish Parliament. There was really a sense in which the Labour Party took Scotland for granted and was not prepared in government in Scotland to do anything that might upset the National Party based in Westminster. There was rumours when they were electing a new leader in 2008 or so that they chose the only person in Scottish Labour more boring than Gordon Brown was a guy called Andrew Gray. The names highlighting just how boring they were. There was really a sense in which that they used their 8 years in power in the Scottish Parliament really not to achieve all that much. If you list the achievements of the Scottish government under Labour, most of those achievements were part of the conditions for forming a coalition with the Liberals during that time. So there's a strong sense in which people felt that the SNP were the party that would be fighting for Scottish interests at the Scottish elections, which is why they did so well at the Holyrood vote. Before now, however, that hasn't translated into votes at Westminster because people thought, well, we should be voting on Scottish issues at the Scottish election and British issues at the Westminster election. But the independence referendum has really turned that on its head, and now people are saying, well, if I want the SNP, I should vote the SNP. And you're right, there's a strong sense in which Labour took Scottish votes for granted and never really concentrated on creating its own political brand and identity unique to Scotland.
And I think then, well, that takes us very easily into Scotland and why it's important in this election. What I think the perceptions of the SNP has been incredibly fascinating as someone who lives here. The leaflets have just been really fascinating into the perceived.
So what leaflets have you received?
Uh,
What have you been
so, okay, so I live in Northeast Fife. That's the constituency, and the constituency is formerly that of Ming Campbell. So very long time Liberal Democrat, stalwart. He was the leader of the Liberal Democrats, and very well known, very well respected, and on a personal vote would get in every time, right? If he was running now, probably most likely, his name recognition and his personal brand, it would probably be enough to make him ahead, put him ahead. But he's retiring, so he is retiring from politics, and that means that his appointed successor, a guy named Tim Brett, who's a local councillor, has had to compete with this SNP wave. And in recent weeks, the SNP seems to be pulling ahead by quite a fair amount, up to about 11 percentage points higher. Now, um, again, as before, a lot of these polls are done as a party affiliation rather than a name. However, in a constituency like Danny Alexander's, that then might have some bearing. But in a constituency like Northeast Fife, where the Lib Dem candidate is now not as well known um, as the predecessor, I think that it means it's a little bit more accurate than not. So we have candidates that are Lib Dem, Labor, Conservative, SNP, and then you remember Michael Scott Hayward, who used to run for UKIP. We interviewed him for our show a few years ago. He's now running. He's running as an independent as well. So apparently he's good fun. So the uh, that's the election. Last round, the Labor candidate was I think had some bizarre circumstances and she had to pull out or something. So Labor wasn't really a force. It doesn't look like it's a force here anyway either. But the leaflets are quite interesting. You have the conservative candidate who's talking about local issues and local people, and we've only gotten one leaflet from him, and it's all just different local people saying why they like him. Okay, that's nicely done. You can see what it's about. Then you have the Labor one. We've now gotten two leaflets from the Labor one. Again, local people, and then saying how wonderful the guy is. So regularly straight stuff. So uh, the Greens. Oh yeah, we also have a Green candidate who's a student at St. Andrews. Greens, we only got a national thing from the Greens, but so the SNP has been sending us a lot of leaflets, and the Liberal Democrats have been sending us a lot of leaflets. Every single SNP leaflet, there is no mention of independence. It's been wiped clean. Um, every single thing about it is it's not local, mind you. There's not really like I mean there are a few things about the local guy and why he's good and why the local people like him, but everything is about Westminster promised things in the referendum. We're going down to Westminster to make sure that they deliver on those promises, and that's it. There's no mention of independence. There's no mention of another referendum. It's been done incredibly specifically, you know, been done very well, actually. The leaflets are very well done. Um, the Lib Dem leaflets, on the other hand, are entirely negative, which is surprising because you'd think that they'd be running on a positive message, but it's all we're the only ones that are powerful enough to stop the SNP. You got to vote for us because otherwise the SNP is going to get in. We're the only ones that can stop them because Labour has been wiped out of Scotland. They have these weird bar graphs that just keep saying, two little voting booths, and like there's the SNP and then Lib Dems, and it's slightly more, right? So vote for us, otherwise the country's going to ruin. And it's been really surprising. I mean, I would have thought that there would be more positive messages on their front.
Sure, sure.
So anyway, those have been our leaflets. We've actually had we've had the Lib Dem candidate actually come and say hello to us at the door. None of the other candidates have come and said hello to us, so they obviously didn't want to make the tracker. We weren't home, but it's incredibly interesting because the SNP they're trying to make the SNP out to be these monsters in a way, right? And I think the challenge is that north of the border, people have been living with the SNP for a while, and they might very much disagree with them, but it's not like they're evil people. And south of the border, they're trying to make them up into again scaremongering about the SNP are these big bad evil people, but then you have episodes like Nicola Sturgeon performing extremely well personally in the leaders debate that I think it's not necessarily confounding people's assumptions, but it's blunting these wild concerns that the separatists are going to come down to break up the union.
Yes.
And I think that that strategy, at least from as a voter, I've been a little disappointed by the fact that the Westminster party seem to be like trying to push that through.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't care. The SNP, it's not the end of the world that they're in Edinburgh. I'm sure that if that there were more SNP MPs at Westminster, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Why don't you
Sure.
just tell me why? Let's move on to other issues.
Sure.
Um,
Sure. I remember seeing a speech in which Nick Clegg said, "It's either me or Alex Salmond," uh, and I thought, well, a lot of people north of the border like Alex Salmond. I know there's a sense in the political class that he's arrogant or aloof or whatever, but
yeah,
actually that's not something that the majority of people think. So actually, in a choice between Nick Clegg and Alex Salmond, I'm not sure people are going to vote the way Nick Clegg thinks they're going to vote.
and I think also you made a point earlier about okay, there's really one big pro. I mean, the Greens were also pro-independence, but there was one big pro-independence party. So the fact that everybody who voted for independence, it's natural that they would have an affinity to the SNP.
Yeah.
I definitely see that. But there's another angle as well that I think is important because I think you're going to find a lot of people who voted no and would vote no again be
Yep.
very tempted to vote for the SNP
Yes.
because the Westminster parties did make certain pledges and promises, and they made them very specifically. They worded them in very specific ways. But as soon as the referendum happened, the first thing the Cameron started to say was to start to qualify and to try and set expectations, about the English Parliament coming in first and doing all this stuff that made that small amount of people that said, I'm voting no, so that because you're saying that you're going to give us more powers, right? That small group of people, I think those people, that population, represent quite a pivotal group of people that are quite tempted to vote for the SNP. Not again endorsing independence, but to say first off, you promised to give us new powers,
Yep.
and so which party would probably be most interested in bullying you until you gave us new powers? Well, the
Sure.
nationalists. Okay, send them in, right? Send them in to knock you around a bit. That and two, I think the fact that the SNP's change um, in the way that they go about talking about things. I think Nicola Sturgeon has been incredibly beneficial for the SNP, but going out of their way to say, look, this is not an endorsement for a new referendum. Even if we won all the seats, this wouldn't be an endorsement of the referendum. You can choose to believe whether or not that's true or not, but at the same time they're doing everything they need to do, and they're being incredibly cunning about how they're pitching themselves.
I
Um, uh,
I think that's
and it's making the Lib Dems, for example, in our local constituency, look a little bit petty, and really really worried. So that's my
no.
my
I
uh,
think
not so brief take.
that's an extremely important point, and actually, polling shows that about 10% of people who voted no are still planning to vote for the SNP at this election. And in my own constituency in Edinburgh, which last time round was a Labour victory followed by about 150 votes by the Liberal Democrats, with the SNP in fourth, they're now projected to win that, even though only about a third of people in my constituency voted for independence. Because you're right, that they get all of those 35%, plus a few more people who are just, you know, they want the SNP to hold Westminster to account, and they think that the SNP will act best in the interests of Scotland than Labour, which is more interested in its national brand.
And now also just take a second to think about people who might be natural labor supporters, but who might not have forgiven them yet, right? In the 2010 election, people who might not have been natural labor supporters, or who might have been natural labor supporters, as in they're liberal or more left, but they did have a party. They had the Liberal Democrats that they could vote for, right? That at least was similar enough to I don't know, take their vote. Are you still there? Still with me?
Hello?
Yep, you're back. Okay.
Sorry, you were
So
talking about people who are maybe to the left in Scotland.
yeah, but nationally, 2010, if I was a Labour supporter, but I can't forgive Labour for whatever reason, and I want to change, you had the Liberal Democrats. Now you're that same person, right? You voted if you voted for the Liberal Democrats, they've gone into coalition with the Tories, and the Tories are not very popular in Scotland, right? Then maybe you still haven't forgiven Labour yet, and you've been disappointed with how Labour's behaved in the past few months. Unlike in England, you do have a party that is left of center, that is another alternative to Labour, right? I mean, I think a lot of people would be of the opinion that like if the SNP dropped independence, they'd be a very very popular party. I mean, they're already a popular party, but they'd be an even more popular party just because they're
Well,
progressive, like the majority of
they,
Scotland is.
well,
So
if they dropped independence after we saw after the debate with Nicola Sturgeon, they could even win parts of England because her message, which was
yeah,
frankly about as left wing as Labour, but much better put and much more believable. She was very popular after the debate. People were seriously talking about, hey, can we have her as prime minister? Well, they went through.
exactly. So I'm just saying that I think Scotland is a very, very interesting situation right now. I think people south of the border just don't get it
Yeah,
right now. I don't think they get the fact that the SNP is not seen by the majority. I mean, I'm not saying that the SNP is loved by everyone. I'm not saying that there's some very hardcore debates, but they are not seen as the kind of antichrist that
yeah.
they're trying to be made out to be, even by people who don't like them, right? Even by
Yeah.
people who wouldn't vote for them, right? And I think that the disconnect there is harmful. Mostly, it's harmful for Labor because the Conservatives don't care. They can make them out to be the monsters at all. But it seems as though it just seems that National Labour is really missing a lot of beats in Scotland right now.
Well,
Um,
yes, and if they don't learn their lesson by losing 40 plus seats in the next election, then it's going to be difficult to see how they can ever recover.
Yeah. So okay, let's look at at what happens on starting May 8th, right? Which will be a fascinating time. But I think this also points to a couple of missteps by the national parties
Yes.
with regards to Scotland. But I'm looking at the poll of polls that the Guardian is bringing together. Now, The Guardian is left leaning, so I do definitely think that there is some skepticism that you need to put on there, but their pictures are the best pictures. Another good one, if you want as a comparator, the FT has a very good set of potential matchups, and their numbers are similar, but they're perhaps a little bit more more encouraging for the conservatives. But right now, I don't know which numbers you are, and you can tell me what you have.
Sure.
But the most up to date is saying that the conservatives are on 275, making them the largest party. The Labor is at 269. The SNP is at 54. The Lib Dems are on 27, and I guess the next largest would be the DU. The DUP is at 21.
Democratic Unionist Party, yeah.
Right.
Well, so I'm looking at. I mean, obviously, everybody's saying broadly the same thing. I'm actually looking at the 538
Okay.
projection, and they're also saying you're right, 278, making the Conservatives the largest party, but far short of an overall majority. The SNP on over 50, and Liberal Democrats down to 25 or so.
Okay. So these are roughly the same.
Yeah,
This is my problem, or this is my question. Um, from my standpoint, and maybe I'm haven't been reading enough or haven't been watching enough. It hasn't seemed like it that David Cameron seems to expect to lose. It doesn't look like that. In the waning days of the 2010 campaign, it seemed like Gordon Brown was expecting not to come out on top, and it seemed like David Cameron was getting ready to, you know, to assume power. Right? There was this feeling that this was going to happen, this almost inevitability. Whereas, at least from what I see, the conservatives don't seem to be feeling like they're going to lose. And my issue with that is if the current polling is correct or around where it's correct, They are the biggest party. However, they're well short of the majority, and them plus the Liberal Democrats are well short of a majority.
Yes.
They would need not only the Liberal Democrats, but UKIP, and I don't understand how you could possibly think that the Liberal Democrats would agree to go into a coalition with UKIP,
Yeah.
um, and the DUP, which is what they'd probably get, and you'd still be in danger of not actually getting there. So for me, and maybe you have some insight on this. What is the route to a conservative to David Cameron staying on as prime minister? What is their most likely route?
Their most likely route is a failed negotiation between Labour, the SNP, and the Liberal Democrats. At the moment, it does not look like Labour and the SNP are going to go into coalition with one another, and that instead the SNP would agree to a kind of confidence and supply arrangement, which is where the SNP get a couple of small things in exchange for which they vote for Labour in any motion of no confidence, and they also vote to pass any budgets, and that's it. Which is a reduced level of cooperation compared to
Yeah.
what we've seen with the Conservatives and the Liberals. So if then Labour and the SNP cannot work out a more formal arrangement, things then swing back to the Conservatives, who then have to try and govern as a more stable minority coalition party. I think one of the things that's really interesting from the last 5 years is how well the coalition government has done at staying a cohesive unit. In fact, people remember the Labour Party, they were always infighting, that was a single party. Whenever people thought about coalition governments, they looked at Italy and said, well, they have a new prime minister every year. And in fact, the coalition has been very stable. And so that's perhaps encouraged people to think that future coalition governments will be equally as stable. But the spread is so broad now that I find it very difficult to see that there'll be any kind of a stable government, be it a conservative liberal government or a Labour liberal government with SNP votes on a few key issues. I think what's going to happen is that there's going to be regardless of what happens, even a coalition party is still going to have some votes short of an overall majority, in which case that means that almost all votes are going to have to be taken on a case-by-case basis. You can't say that any party is going to be able to get their agenda through.
Can you briefly explain the situation with the law that had been passed to have a 5-year term?
Sure.
Because there's a lot of misinformation going back and forth about, well, what if a party loses the vote of no confidence? Does that mean an election is called, or does it mean that the situation is different now?
Well, so I think that's a bit of a red herring. So you're right. There's a bill that says elections are now every 5 years before the prime minister could decide on a whim or based on political strategy when to have the election. And that was an important piece of legislation to get the Liberal Democrats on board, because they were afraid that they would, be abused for 2 years. Then Cameron would call an election and win overall majority. So they wanted to know if they were in coalition, they were in for the long haul. And you're right. Part of the condition of that was that they said, and we will have an election if there's a vote of no confidence, but a vote of no confidence only wins if there's 55% of MPs vote against the government, which was unlikely given the numbers there. I think that's red herring, and the reason I think that's red herring is because while it takes 55% of MPs to vote of no confidence, it only takes 50% of MPs to change that rule and then have another vote of no confidence with a new level of 50%. So I suspect that if there were to be a vote of no, if a government really wanted to have an election, it would be difficult. It would be harder to arrange, but not impossible. So
right.
I think that's a bit of a red herring.
Okay, so but as it stands right now,
without any changes in legislation, you're going to have a minority government that's in power for 5 years. They can say command 48% of the vote, which means that a vote of no confidence wouldn't be able to reach a 55% threshold, at least not on day one, and that could mean that you've got a few years of relative inaction.
Okay. So with the um, looking on the other side of the coin, right? Nick Clegg has gone on record saying that the party with the most amount of seats should have a chance to start negotiations or to have a chance to form a government. If it looks like if it happens, if it turns out the way it looks like it's going to turn out, at least by my calculations, I just don't see how the conservatives can make a majority out of any kind of a coalition. Um, uh, I mean, unless if the SNP doesn't do quite as well, it seems as though the benefits to that will be Labor rather than the Conservatives, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
uh, in that event, it seems as though the Conservatives are also talking up this idea that we're going to run into a constitutional crisis, because one, which I think is a little bit more legitimate, the majority of the if the Conservatives are the largest party, but they are not the government, the largest amount of seats aren't part of the government, so that's unfair. Um, uh, Even though it is the system that we're in. Um, but two, that a deal would have to be made with the SNP, which is a regional party, and that's a problem because one, they're the separatist group and they want to actively break up the UK, and two, the majority of the United Kingdom didn't have a chance to vote, and it doesn't represent them, right?
yeah.
So, so that seems to be a big problem. Um, I find that problematic, and I want to hear your thoughts on this because I find a little bit of that problematic. One, because it is the system that we're in, right? And you could say, well, if you don't like first past the post system, then change it. But because it's first past the post system, that's the system that the SNP is has been strategizing to take advantage of. So they're obviously playing by the rules, right? Um, the point about the SNP not having the chance to be voted for all over the UK, I think, is a valid one. However, it's not the end of the world. The fact, though, that it's a regional party and people in England are going to be ruled by a party that does not exist in their borders, it's kind of an ironic argument, seeing as that is exactly what the SNP would argue has been happening, for the past several years, with Scotland, right?
Yeah.
The Conservative government, a Conservative led coalition, and there's one or two Conservative MPs from Scotland. So I find that those ideas of the constitutional crisis a bit challenging because in the same way, I mean, you're dealing with vastly different numbers, and I think that's legitimate, a legitimate concern, but vastly different numbers of technically the third largest party in the UK. I don't see that as being constitutionally an issue. I think it is an issue in other ways, but is that what do you think about that?
Uh, I mean, I certainly don't think it's a constitutional crisis. It's you're right. There's an extent to which there's maybe a democratic deficit, but that's been at the heart of the problem with the first past the post system for decades. The Liberal Democrats traditionally have garnered, the high 20s in terms of percentage of votes
Yeah,
and the low 20s, the high teens in percentage of MPs, just because it's really hard to translate moderate support into a high number of MPs because of the first past the post system. So you're right that they're playing the hand they've been dealt. Um, it's a little ironic actually. If you just focus north of the border, a lot of Labour people thought that the first past the post system benefited them. So when there was a referendum 4 years ago on the alternative vote system, a lot of Labour people said, well, actually, we don't want the alternative vote system, and actually, that would be really helpful for them north of the border right now to prevent them from being wiped out.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
uh, so I find that's slightly ironic.
Interestingly, other countries, I mean, an example strikes me, I think, that Israel, not this most recent election, but the election previous, the left leaning party headed by Livni was actually technically the largest party, but then was the coalition was on the right wing. But here's my scenario that I want to put to you, right? Because after looking at this, this is the only scenario that I see that if the polling looks like how it is, how it's going to go right now, I think this is the only scenario that makes sense to me. It ends up 269 for Labour, 275 for Conservatives. Conservatives are the largest party. The Lib Dems are on 25, 27. The Labour and the Lib Dems form a coalition, a proper coalition, as in ministers and all that stuff. So that means that the largest, the two national parties with the largest amount of seats are running the coalition, right? So that means the Labour plus Lib Dems equals more than the Conservatives. So that nullifies the Conservatives' issue with the largest party. With the SNP agreeing to implicitly support the government, not even in exchange for certain things that are made clear beforehand. So there's not any there's not any discussions, at least public discussions. There's no meetings between Nicola Sturgeon and Ed Miliband, but it basically all happens behind the scenes. And the SNP take their seats, and they agree to basically vote up the coalition in a vote of in a confidence vote, assuming that there will be certain things done for them. I think that's the most likely scenario, with the Greens maybe coming in. Maybe the Greens get environmental secretary or something, just to put a bow on it. I think that to me is the most likely scenario, and I want to hear your thoughts on that, one. And two, I think the only route to victory for the Conservatives is if the Lib Dems hold on to more seats than they're forecasted to lose, which is a potential, which is a possibility, and the SNP. So the SNP losing their some of the Lib Dem seats that maybe they thought they might have an easy game with, and for the DUP to then come in, and for the Conservatives to wipe out UKIP, so that you could have a conservative Lib Dem coalition with DUP support. So those are my two most likely scenarios, and I want to hear your thoughts on both.
Well, so I think your first scenario is pretty accurate. I think I'd be surprised if the Greens were a part of a coalition. But apart from that, I thought that was a very accurate way of looking at things. But of course, the problem is that you would have a coalition government that still didn't have a majority of the seats. And so you're right, it would be needing backing from the SNP on every single vote to get anything done, and so it would be inherently unstable. And on the Conservative side, the one caveat I would say is that in 1996, the Conservative government survived with the votes of the Ulster Unionist Party, who at the current election are projected to have only one seat. There's not a history of an official or even implied coalition between the Conservatives and the DUP, so that would require some kind of delicate negotiations.
I only say that because the DUP has gone on record to say that they are going to support whatever the stable government will be. That they haven't at least they haven't said that they're going to be aligning themselves with Labour, or they're refusing to ally themselves with anyone. It seems as though, I mean, you 326 seats for a majority, but they're only going to need 323 because of Sinn Féin. So, they have gone on record in doing that. So I just think that that's the only route whereby the Conservatives can somehow say, well, look, we're the largest party in Parliament. The Lib Dems, we've been working with them for 5 years, and we want to work with them for another 5 years. So we all know each other. We're not going to have UKIP involved. We're going to keep out the awful, evil nationalists up in Scotland, who want to break up this union. So DUP come and help us, make that happen. I think that's the only, like, I don't see any other option. I mean,
I agree with you. I mean, assuming the polling all remains constant, the actual outcome of the election, to an extent, is actually going to be decided, you're right, on the days after the election rather than days before it, for that very reason, because nobody's going to have a
yeah,
majority. What's just a small observation, perhaps just to finish with, is that uh, one of the issues during the independence referendum was that seldom do Scottish votes actually make a difference in
yeah,
determining the party of government. And
yeah.
while that may have been true for the last 30 years, it's definitely not true
Definitely not true today.
in this election.
And I think so. We'll maybe finish with this with your top tips or projections as to what happens if certain results are met. But it's certainly a very very interesting time again to be in Scotland for this. And again, I think it probably is far more interesting than being south of the border.
Yeah,
But I mean, this election has had a lot of unique aspects. One, the SNP is now the third largest party in the UK, which is just an
astonishing for a
interesting.
party that's only standing in 59 out of 650 seats.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, two, I think the launch of Nicola Sturgeon onto the UK national
Yeah,
stage, I think that's been incredibly beneficial for the SNP. She's been excellent in terms of how she's been presenting the policies, and in stark contrast to how Alex Salmond, was perceived. And I think also the new ways of doing things, largely as a result of the fighting between Miliband and Cameron in the media, has also been very interesting, and I think has not helped the parties that how they thought they would.
that's true.
Last time in 2010, you had the leader debates, three of them on stage. And that was it. This time you had one leader debate that had all seven of them on
Yeah,
stage. That was argued very forcefully by Cameron to say, well, it should be all of us, and that arguably, really helped Nicola Sturgeon, and to a lesser extent the Greens and Plaid Cymru, achieve some sort of national attention. I think it helped them far more than it did to lessen Ed Miliband. The second set of debates where Cameron refused to engage and Clegg was asked not to. I thought that was a very interesting debate as well, because it I think uh, it allowed everybody else to have a chance to say something, and for the coalition to not be able to respond. And then finally, the individual leaders being interviewed, having 30 minutes of question time by a rather hostile audience,
yes.
I think was expected to be this kind of nice way to end off things, and it was actually quite impassioned, and it was pretty fun. So I think that's been a real big surprise for me as well. So to finish it off, what have been your biggest observations, and also what are you going to be watching for come the 8th? So uh,
What I'm going to be watching for on election night is actually something that you alluded to earlier, which is when you said, well, we're talking about polling data in terms of party data versus name data. Um, just to break that down, what that means is when people are asked, who are you going to vote for tomorrow in terms of party,
mm,
they say, oh, well, I hate those liberal Democrats and or
yeah,
whatever. Whereas when you say this person in your constituency, sometimes people are more likely to say, oh, well, actually, I don't like the liberal Democrats overall, but my guy is actually a good guy, so I might vote for him again.
yeah,
So there's a sense in which maybe the polls aren't able to get that. You've had some of these constituency polls by Lord Ashcroft being released, which maybe gives some insight into that effect, which has been taken into account in the poll of polls. But what I'm going to be looking for are going to be deviations on the constituency level from what are projected at the moment, because each of those deviations could add up to a significant change compared to what we're discussing now.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that's going to make all the difference, I think, when they have the negotiations over, coalitions versus confidence in supply and so forth. So I think that's what I'm going to be looking for in election night.
Okay. I think if the SNP wins more than 54 seats, you're going to have this like Labor Lib Dem minority coalition that I'm saying,
Yeah.
because that's going to push them over their projected numbers, and into positive territory. So it would just be even more positive with the Lib Dems. So I think watch Scotland and watch, if the SNP have a really good night, I think that will benefit Labour, but it'll be ugly. And I will say also that Lord Ashcroft polls are definitely questionable because their party affiliation not
Sure, yes, Lord Ashcroft, of course, is the largest donor to the Conservative Party.
yeah, he is the largest donor to the Conservative Party, although his polls are well regarded, right? And they do give you a sense of the parties. However, the most recent two leaflets that the Lib Dems have put through the door have both had a big picture of Charles Kennedy saying why you should vote Lib Dem.
Oh, really?
And personally, I think that is a worrying sign, just
Sure.
due to Charles Kennedy's recent developments, but that they can't, that they think that there's that it seems as though they think they are in trouble.
Sure.
So it's not even their own internal polling must be looking quite bleak at the moment, for them to try that out. Not even trusting anything. Nick Clegg doesn't make any kind of appearance at
No.
all. But to try and say that the most high-profile liberal Democrat Scot is Charles Kennedy,
Yeah.
that's why you should vote for the liberal Democrats. I don't know. It reeks of something. So with that, shall we do our quiz?
Yes, we shall do our quiz. So my understanding is that your questions are all on the election, and none of my questions are on the election.
Yeah, sounds fair. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you about this individual, and you can tell me which leader of a major UK political party it is.
Okay.
Okay, so all of my questions are these trivias, right?
Okay.
Okay, so first, this person has appeared in an advertisement for the bookmaker Paddy Power ahead of golf's 2014 Ryder Cup. This is a leader of a major UK political party.
Major UK political party. Paddy Power.
Paddy Power is like a betting,
It must be Nigel Farage.
yes, right.
Of course, of course. Famously, of course, Paddy Power sponsored Dennis Rodman's trips to North Korea. So there you go.
Nice.
Nice.
So good company.
Sure, sure. Okay, so my first question is, the leader of which country was involved in a hair-pulling controversy earlier this week?
Hair pulling controversy. That would be the Prime Minister of New Zealand.
That would be the Prime Minister John Key of New Zealand, who's been accused of pulling the ponytail of a waitress at a restaurant he goes to over the course of 6 months.
True. However, in his defense, apparently everyone tugged on everyone in there or something like that, and that was a normal thing.
Well, I mean, the waitress apparently said she asked him to stop, but it didn't have much of an
Oh
effect.
yeah, there's that part of it too, but that was just what his defense was.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. Okay, so that's one each.
All right, so this person is a fan of the Danish political drama Borgen. All right, and this person describes the drama, as a drama but with an authentic twist. As a politician, I can certainly relate to it. In February of 2013, this politician interviewed actress who played the fictional prime minister in this show for a national TV broadcast. So this political leader interviewed the actress because they were so excited and such a fan of the show.
Uh, well, of course, Alex Salmond is the leader of the Scottish National Party's Westminster delegation. So it's
I'm
Alex.
talking about national ones. All these people were appeared in the leader debates.
Oh goodness. Okay. Then I guess I will go for Ed Miliband.
Nope, it's Nicola Sturgeon.
Oh really?
She's a huge fan of it, and she did an interview for STV Scotland Tonight, but she was interviewing the actress.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Okay. So my next question is about Russia. Continuing controversy, of course, over their annexation of Crimea. But where this week did Russia discuss annexing, possibly with the help of China?
You mean another place that they consider annexing?
Yes. The deputy prime minister of Russia, Dmitry Rogozin, was in China meeting with the vice premier when he suggested that they two might be able to work together on this.
Okay. Well, I guess my default answer would be Mongolia because that's like what they
Between the
share.
Sure.
Um, but could it be somewhere? Oh, I'll say Mongolia.
Okay, well, you're only off by about a thousand miles, because it's in fact the moon.
Ah, right. Oh well. Oh well. I must be a lunatic.
Well, quite. The Russians are hoping to start colonizing the moon before by 2024,
Okay. Wow. All right.
which will be
Um,
Hillary Clinton's problem.
it'll be Hillary Clinton's problem. Which country gets the dark side? I guess you know. Um,
Well,
okay. So this person was asked to choose who the greatest British Prime Minister has ever been, right? And their answer was Clement Attlee.
uh, that must be Ed Miliband.
Yep, Ed Miliband.
Well, I
Really
mean,
about Clement Attlee.
well, of course, he's the iconic labor leader who founded the National Health Service.
Yes. However, greatest ever?
Well, as opposed to who? Tony Blair?
I don't know. Benjamin Disraeli had a really cool sounding name. William Pitt the Younger, William Pitt the Even Younger, Pitt the
Oh,
Glint in the
well,
Milkman's Eye. You know?
okay, sure. But Disraeli, I mean, well, yeah, okay. Disraeli wasn't a Labour Prime Minister, but that wasn't the question.
I know.
Um, okay, so what happened to Marlene Olivo after she threw a mango hitting the head of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro?
What happened to her after she threw a mango?
Yes, hitting his head.
And did she throw it out of spite or anger, or was this like an accidental mango throwing?
Uh, uh, it turns out actually that, well, I don't know. I'm not sure I can answer that question with
Okay.
without kind of
Okay.
helping you with the answer.
Let's say and it hit him on the head.
Yeah.
All right. He was trying to catch it, and they both went out for mango juice afterwards.
Oh, nearly. She was actually given a brand new apartment. She'd been trying to pass him a note, and so she'd written this note on a mango, which he then threw at him, and the note was complaining about the state of her housing.
Well,
She wasn't intending to hit him on the head, just get the note to him. Anyway, it did hit him on the head, and he read the note, and she's now got a brand new apartment.
well, Maduro's head is muy duro.
I don't speak any Spanish, so
It means it's very hard. Like it's never mind. Okay. All right. This you should get. This person had a slight hiccup because they said that they supported a team and they were a lifelong supporter of this of a soccer team, a football team. When in reality they've gone on record quite a number of times saying that a different team was their favorite team.
uh,
After being pointed out this, the person responded that it was a brain fade.
A brain fade, yes. A phrase surely that will surely enter the British political lexicon for decades to come. That was, of
Yeah.
course, David Cameron.
And bonus, which club does he support, and which club did he say that he supported?
Uh, West Ham and Arsenal?
So he apparently supports Aston Villa,
Oh,
and
okay.
he said West Ham.
Said West Ham, yes, okay. Well, so no bonus point for me there. So my fourth question is about Norwegian Prime Minister Erna Solberg. Why was her mobile phone in the news this week?
Oh, did it play like a funny pop song?
That would have been pretty great. Actually, it's more about where she keeps her mobile phone. It emerged that due to what she said was a lack of pockets in female outfits, that when she doesn't have her purse with her, she keeps her phone in her bra,
Oh,
saying that
lovely.
desperate times call for desperate measures.
Exactly. Literally measures. No? Okay. All right. So in finally for me, so in an interview in 2011, this person said that they dealt with the pressures of political office by reading novels late at night and crying regularly to music.
Uh, I suppose this must be Nick Clegg.
It is Nick Clegg.
Yes. I mean, I guess I got that by deduction because we haven't talked about any about Nick Clegg as in the other questions. But in fairness, that's not the most. That's not necessarily the qualities you look for in a strong, confident leader prepared to stand up to Russian aggression or what have you. So,
It shows that he's a sensitive man.
I see, I see.
Yeah. Well, there
So,
you go. So I think you won.
well, so I think that's true. I mean, questions were a little harder than I think yours were. You have a chance to redeem yourself with this last question. Um,
Okay. A thousand
Zayn
points.
Malik Zayn Malik is a former member of One Direction, and he left the band a few weeks ago, causing an outcry amongst the group's many fans. But there was one fan who believes that there was a place where the band are still together. So who is that fan, and where is that place?
That fan, Gordon, is Stephen Hawking. And
Yes,
that place is a different universe. And he
yes, yes.
replied to this little girl or this teenager who said, who was sad about the breakup or whatever it was, the guy leaving. And Stephen Hawking said that there was another, if you're upset about Zayn leaving One Direction, you should become a theoretical physicist because there is a theory of multiple universes. So in a universe, he's still with a band, and in another universe, you and he are happily married. So yeah.
My goodness, my goodness. Well, that was an answer to a question.
Oh, he's great.
And
Frankly,
with
though,
that,
I didn't know who the kid was, so that tells you how old I'm getting.
who Zayn Malik was?
No,
Okay, fair enough.
I'm not young and hip like you are.
Yes, yes, I'm down with Zane. I guess that brings us to the end of the show. Next week we'll be talking about uh, who became the prime minister and how stable their government is going to be
Yeah, because they're gonna figure that out after one day.
after yes, yes, okay.
We're gonna have fun though. Okay,
Very
alrighty.
soon, lots of fun. Okay, well,
Well, have a
thank
good
you,
week, Gordon.
and you too, man.
All right, bye.